I am so blessed to actually be able to talk to you. I've followed your work remotely here in Chico from the homeless in Seattle and some of the poetry and stuff that you've done and just the posts and all your activism work. And it's just a pleasure to have you here on the show, Gabriella.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to just kind of share some thoughts and feelings and kind of go with it, see what happens.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your life, Gabriella.
Well, I live an interesting life, and I live on the streets of Seattle in a van. And I used to have a car, and out of the car came a soup kitchen. And I started just living in community with the people in tents and the people on the streets, and just seeing a lot of need, for some one-on-one types of interactions, counseling, people that just need to talk, people that are having those moments of just feeling like they're not going to make it. And so I started out in Albuquerque, New Mexico 3 years ago and just started meandering across the country and landed here in Seattle and started seeing all the women and children in their cars and people living, just walking from city to city looking for anything and everything, any kind of job they can find. And I've always been a very independent person, and so I kind of can flow with whatever happens, and not everybody can do that, and I thought that was normal. So that's kind of how it all got started, and I had worked with the homeless before I left Albuquerque. I did a feed on Saturday mornings in which I got live music at 8 o'clock in the morning in the train park in downtown Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so there was a place near there where they had a lot of the people coming out of the prison system. It was a halfway house, and that's where I mostly did a lot of work with the homeless before I left, but I never really thought about being on the other side of the spoon. And so now I'm dealing with that.
It sounds like you have a van, you run a soup kitchen out of your van, and you just pull into places, and you open up your van, you give people nourishment, and you talk to them and make them feel better about their community and themselves.
It's pretty much like that, except for I'm working out of buildings now, and so my van is actually where I live, and then I work with a group in a nearby city where we feed every Thursday at noon to a whole community. And then when I had opened my soup kitchen in my car, I ended up combining with the Catholic Worker House here, and we had a day center at the Hillman City Collaboratory in Rainier Beach. And now I'm just doing a lot of counseling, mostly meeting people or getting phone calls of people who are not sure how to handle someone else that's kind of maybe not coping with homelessness very well. And so I've had to learn my way through the mental health care system here because it's not something I'm familiar with. I'm familiar with Albuquerque's because I raised 180 treatment foster children in my home before I became homeless, and I was a teacher in the public schools. I worked with the hardcore kids coming out of a lot of them that are coming out of the prison system. And so I've had a lot of experience with different personalities and different addictions, and it just translated really well when I became homeless. It just was kind of natural because as a treatment foster parent, you're constantly looking for the benefit of that person, and you're listening to how they're feeling and what their needs are, and sometimes you have to know when to turn the lights down in the environment or turn the sound up in the environment or know whether they need to eat, because we can't often identify our own needs when we are in desperate need. It's really difficult to choose and pick because you are having to multitask through that, and it can be very trying for some people that struggle with that.
So it sounds like this has been somewhat a lifetime calling, helping people. I mean, you did this, sounds like, for a living, or even bringing in foster care kids. Maybe you could expand upon that a little bit.
I think it's been a lifetime. I think my education came by going into an orphanage when I was 7 years old, and when I got to the United States, I ended up in an orphanage, which is kind of the other way around. I had 5 older siblings, and I had both parents, but there were some issues, and my mother was exhausted, and that's back then where women didn't make very much money. She was making 75 cents an hour with the civil service, on the base there in Albuquerque, and it wasn't enough to support 6 kids, and my father had been wounded in the head, and I believe a lot of that had to do with some medication, self-medicating with alcohol and whatnot, and so I think because of that, my mother just could not keep it together, and she already was from a large family, and she was overwhelmed, And so I think the day my education started was then, because that might sound like it's not possible, but it really is. When you're a handicapped kid and you have no choice but to sit down, shut up, and pay attention, you kind of pay attention. Mm-hmm. And if you're somebody who is like I am, I absorb a lot. I read people. I had to, because you get into this world where the people you trusted are no longer there. Therefore, you really have to weigh what you are seeing and who you are around, and it becomes that hypervigilance and hyper-awareness that happens to a person who lives outside also happens to children who become homeless through foster care, because being in a foster home is not a home. You're still a homeless child. It does not feel any different being a foster kid in a foster home than it does when you're homeless. My story is going to be different than a lot of people, because everybody has their own story of how they coped and how they dealt with it. And in my mindset, I study a lot about what happens to people mentally, and then how do you meet their needs based on that. That was all. My education came out of that, and then, of course, later on I went to college and went to school for social work. But
I have two questions to kind of wrap what you had said, because there's a couple of holes, as you described it. I mean, what country did you physically immigrant to?
I was born in Central America in Panama. And then we moved a little bit around, and so I was exposed to a lot of things, a lot of very wealthy life. I mean, I had a lot of experience and a lot of nurturing hands that loved me, and that's kind of the opposite of a lot of kids that go into the foster care system. They've already struggled with a hard life.
Would it be too personal to describe your handicap, or?
Oh, I had Perthes disease in my hips, which is a disease where your hip sockets don't quite form right, and it takes a little while to get that straight. And my mother had 2 children with that. It was actually kind of a rare thing for there to be more than one child in a family, but 2 of us had it. And so that was a lot on her, to deal with a handicap too. And so that was me. And then I was bored. I can tell you that just sitting around was just not the thing I could do without having to occupy my mind by just listening and soaking it in, because there's nothing else you can do,
So in Panama, you were in it. You lived with I'm calling it an intact family. You lived with a mother and your father. Yes. And then you moved to United States. About what time frame?
I came when I was little. I don't know that I have an exact time.
Was it in the 70s, the 60s?
I ended up here. Let's see. I went into foster care here the day before my 7th birthday in 1969 in the United States. So I honestly don't know exactly how long I was out of the States, but I remember a lot of things like, cobblestone streets and stone pillars and things that you don't see in the U.S., because I wondered about them for a long time. And then when I did meet my mother and describe them to me, she said that was highly impossible that I could remember. And I said, well, I just did.
How did you end up in foster care? So it sounds like
I think my mom was overwhelmed. I think my father was injured in the head, and he became a very different person, and that's a big struggle with a lot of the wives that are having to deal with people coming back from war. Is the person you sent there does not come back as the same person, and so then you have a lot of that responsibility falling on the shoulders of women, and having to not only raise their children, but now having to care for an injured husband who's been through the war and flashbacks. And so I think that was a tough thing to deal with, for sure.
So did you reunite with your paternal parents?
I got to see about once a month. Sometimes I didn't see her for a little while, but it was many years. I stayed in foster care until I was 18. I aged out of the system. I did see her. I wasn't ever allowed visits for very long, and I always had to be accompanied by someone when I did visit with her, and it just was because I had some very odd foster parents that were controlling. But so that was really all I knew of her. And then, of course, when I became an adult, I could go and see her and do whatever, and by that time I was grown. And then I took care of her before she passed away. Mm-hmm. And she passed away not too shortly before I lost my home. So it all kind of came down at once.
So when you were 18, you majority out of the foster care system, and then you led, the typical, or you led an American life where you had jobs, you went to school.
Oh yeah, did all the things. I had 3 children and a husband, and was married for 11 years. Just was a mom and a professional clown and a comedian. And
Mm-hmm. Now, when did you first go roofless?
Oh, it's been, I want to say 2009. March of 2009 was when I first went houseless. And for a while I was able to kind of float by house sitting and, taking care of things. And then I had wonderful friends here and there that I could stay with. But the circumstances under which I lost my home entailed a lot of police intervention for 2 of my children that were addicts. And so that caused a problem with my treatment license, which I chose to give up. And right after that, the school chose to shut down the program that I used. So I lost both being able to be a treatment parent and my job, while I was dealing with 2 kids that were getting into trouble from heroin and meth use, and they had some serious struggles, and that brought the SWAT team down on my home for just petty crimes, very petty crimes. It was really sad. And so I ended up not being able to stay in the house, plus it was really uncomfortable for my neighbors and for me to put them through that, because we had all grown pretty close, and I had a neat life, lots of pictures on Facebook. And so it became a real issue to where, I had to learn a lot about the police department and about laws and about drug addiction. And I never, even growing up, I never touched drugs, or I never had an interest in that. I don't have an interest in, really even drinking very much. And so it was really new to me to have 2 children that were very smart and were homeschooled and bright and beautiful, all of a sudden become these horrendous drug addicts that were just stealing things, cars, old cars. I mean, I'm not justifying anything, because they need to be consequenced for what happened, but I got to witness a lot of brutality, and a lot of what was happening in the world all of a sudden kind of struck me, and I went, oh my God, wait a minute, where have I been, and when did this started happening to people? If my children, whom I know I raised to be good people, although they're suffering through this addiction, because an addiction is suffering, even if it's self-inflicted, it's still painful to be that person. It's still something we need to have compassion for. And sometimes I think some of the programs that intervene give the wrong impression to people, like you're supposed to totally withdraw and let them sit there and rot. And I don't agree with that. And so the passion comes from the witness. And the witness was seeing so many people devastated in my own neighborhood, in my own community. Friends losing their children to heroin overdoses when they're barely 18 years old. And so during that time of all of that happening, my daughter went missing, and they were unearthing women on the west side of Albuquerque. And she was gone during that time. And there's always that last straw that you can't get past. And during this time, I'm getting sicker and sicker. I have an illness now, an autoimmune disease. I've got severe arthritis, but my mind is a mile a minute. I just don't have the body to back that up. And so in the middle of all of that, and then these women suddenly, being unearthed in a mass grave site, and I'm missing my beautiful daughter. She's 4'11". She's this beautiful girl that went just wasted. I don't know, probably lost 60 pounds and hardly even had 60 pounds to lose in a very short amount of time. And my son was going down that road as well. It was a little harder to lose my daughter to the streets than it was to lose my son in some ways, because there's so much more vulnerability to being a woman on the streets, and so much more that goes into being able to survive the homelessness and the not being able to get to a bathroom. I mean, there's just so many things that go into it. And here I've got this little girl that I've raised, and that was a treatment foster parent too, and was a beautiful human being, become this horrific drug addict in just a very short amount of time. And then they both started at it, and it snowballed into this culmination of, to where there was nothing left. I mean, I spent my money doing what I could to help them. I was paying for Suboxone, the drug Suboxone, which was very expensive. I ended up using, my IRA. I did. Oh, there was so much detail into that. And my mother passing took me a while to grieve, and so that was happening at the same time. And there's always just that straw, and that was my straw. And they're both in prison now, and so I support both them and myself on $749 a month unless I can sell Real Change, the newspaper Real Change, which is the homeless newspaper here in Seattle. An amazing group of people that work with people from the streets and helping people get some kind of income and getting on their feet and spending time with them at picnics and just doing amazing things with them.
Last follow-up question was, so how old were your kids? Were they young adults when...
They were young adults, and the problem that happened was my address was on their paperwork, but since they were adults, they had to take my address off of their documents, off of the police records, right? And so that never happened. So because their address was my address, the raids happened on my home. It was really sad because it was petty drug addicts. For what they paid for one raid, they could have rehabilitated one of my children.
Let's transition here a little bit. I mean, when I physically air this, I'm going to be playing like an edited version of your Change Homelessness project. But let's just talk about that a little bit. How you got involved with that?
Well, I met an activist when I first got here that does a lot of work with the homeless. Her name is Elizabeth Maupin, and she had heard of a film project that they were asking for people that could articulate the human condition in terms of homelessness. And she said, "Oh, I know this person, and she's homeless, and she lives here in Seattle." And so she introduced me to, Seattle University was involved on it, and I got involved with the Faith and Family Homelessness Project that they had, and they came and asked me if I would be interested in doing a film, and I said, well, sure. I feel like I'm already going through this. I don't hide much, and I'm willing to be that vulnerable voice that says, yeah, I'm homeless, here I am, and I know what that's going to sound like to comfortable people, the comfortables that live in houses, and I know what it's going to sound like, and it's also kind of odd for a lot of my friends to be seeing me face homelessness because of how strong I've always been and how I had a home and I took care of all these kids and I did all this stuff, but then that last straw happened, right?
I mean, what emotions did the project bring forward for you?
Oh, man, it just, I don't think I thought about the magnitude of it until I went to see it aired, and I saw it aired first at Seattle University. It was only 14 minutes long. It's a very short film. It's really nice to use in trainings and different things like that when you're helping people kind of understand homelessness a little bit better. I signed a piece of paper saying, yes, I'll do this, and I went to go pick up the postcards that they had decided to print, and I didn't know they were going to do this, but they used my face on it and a quote on it, and then it had all of the qualifications on the back side of it. It's like a postcard. I'll send you one. We'll have to get your address. And I saw my face on that, and that's when everything just went, oh, wow. I didn't realize when I first did that project what that was going to turn into or how it would impact other people. I just hoped it would and went into it with good intentions that I hoped it would help some people. And I got introduced to everybody, and I saw they gave me the postcard, and it had my face on it. And I had long blonde hair when I got here, and I tripped and broke my left arm while I was at a local library. So I had to shave my head off, and my hair wasn't very long, and it's gray, and now. And when I saw that picture, I just went, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. That's the next thing. I've never worked for anybody else before. I've always had my own business. I've always had my own, I had a certain amount of state level I had to be accountable to for having a treatment foster care home, but I was a contractor. And so even as a teacher, I was a contractor. And so I thought I just didn't know what I was going to do next because of the decline in the loss of energy. I used to have a lot more energy than I do now. And so for a while I got a little displaced on being able to manage an illness, manage homelessness, manage losing my children to the prison system, and manage the judgment from other people because I hung in there with them and chose to go through the journey and chose to go through the struggle. I don't know if that answered your question. I'm kind
of... Well, maybe I can wrap it a little bit, because I watched the film yesterday. I really thought it was very well done in that.
Thank you.
They really captured the emotions of the people. I mean, I've seen a lot of these works that are done where the people are just kind of like almost reading a script and the emotion's not there in their face, right?
Yeah.
But you could see that, and I like how it was interspersed with city conditions. Anyway, it was a very powerful piece for me, but it started, for me, it brought back, I mean, I was teary because it brought back just a lot of similar stories. I mean, I've only been doing this 3 years, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people. It's like, it's the stories that aren't on camera that just eat you alive. And it's just, I don't know, it all kind of swept back. I mean, almost every single story I watched, you know, talking about the youth and the older person there, just the people that were in there, the 6 different people. I don't know, it just helped me to connect with them, but just brought back these memories that, you know, I have had and I have actually seen. And I was a homeless runaway as a child, as a 16-year-old. So I have that background of being, before they had homelessness, they had runaways if you were kids. You know? Yes.
I've always been a mom, and the mom thing just translated to the streets. And so when I met the people from the film, and I met and listened to, I already knew a couple people from the Ballard Canal because sometimes I rolled a soup through there in a little cart that I had. And so I knew some of them, and I would sit on the water and talk to them for hours about stuff. And, you know, the emotions are so varied and so many. And I believe a lot of people, if they were not multisensory beings before they became homeless, they certainly are now, because that plays into it too. All of a sudden you have this very heightened awareness of your surroundings. You need to be that way in order to survive a lot of things, because you know there's just so many different things that could happen. So that part of it, everything was just shaken. I was just shaken by how difficult, and how I didn't even realize when I fed those people in the park. Sorry, I didn't mean it, those people. I fed those people in the park, and when you're on the other side of the spoon, you still have no clue unless you've really had to live that. I appreciate so many things that are done to try and teach people what that's like. Like they do some things here where Union Gospel Mission will put people out on the streets for a week, and they can go live as homeless. But I have this poem that's on my Facebook page right now, and it's a haiku that I wrote when we were living at the Sammamish State Park with no water, no electricity, dark as all get out, snow on the ground. And it's only fun if you know you get to go home. And you, when you have that concept of, oh, I got a wife to go back to and a house to go back to, seriously appreciate that people will go out and attempt to try and understand it. And but it isn't. I mean, it's just so much more complicated. I'm a fairly strong person for the most part, but I can say that, you know, there's just times where I just go and have to be completely away from everybody that's homeless and not look at it and go sing or go perform or go, I do a lot of different things here with different bands and just stellar people that will go and do music in the park and serve pizza, and there's a new great group of angels that I'm with. And so the emotions are so wide and so varied because there's so many ups and downs to it, because even somebody serving you a meal is a shock to your system a little bit, to somewhat. And it could be, too, that I'm experiencing it from a white privilege. Maybe I can see that, and I can honestly say that does exist in me sometimes, where I also go through wow, I used to think this about homelessness, and boy, was I ever wrong. And so I'm seeing so many things, and the Burien action, I don't know if you've heard about that one, where they were going to issue tickets for, and I don't think the language is in there anymore, but it was for brushing your teeth in a bathroom, $250 fine if you're, you know, caught doing that, and there were several things on the docket. And when I saw that and saw a community that was willing to just totally oust all homeless people over with any little law they could get them on so they could kick them out, rather than doing something about it, because you're still going to have to pay for the police coverage and the this and the that, so why not just take that money and put in a small urban rest stop somewhere near Burien where people can go and take care of themselves? And So these kinds of things come along, and when that strikes my emotion, when I see things like that that provoke me and go, okay, that's something I want to get involved in. And it was an amazing group of people that are all living on the streets, that are all fighting or showing up at the foreclosed houses for women that are becoming homeless. And there's just several groups that I work with. I follow them because they're getting something done. And Shama Sawant is another one that has just been a wonderful friend and comrade in terms of trying to change the housing issue and trying to, bring in a new perspective. We have to do something. We have to look at things differently. We have to.
Well, God bless you, Gabriella. Forward to, seeing your travels.
Okay. And, well, it'll be on Facebook.
All righty. Blessings to you. Thanks again
for
being who you are.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.